You're very welcome back. Now, award-winning author, columnist and literary editor of the Irish Times, Fintan O'Toole, has just written a book on playwright George Bernard Shaw, the first person to win both a Nobel Prize and an Oscar.
Judging Shaw is a biography of the author with over 100 photographs and letters, many of which have never previously been published. Fintan, good morning. You're very welcome.
Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning, Fintan.
How was the soup?
The soup is absolutely fantastic. It would get you through an Irish winter, I'll tell you.
It certainly would, wouldn't it? I think Mr. Shaw would approve.
Yeah. Got 5 stars on the restaurant. Do you remember that?
Let's just brush over that. He said it's not really great cook. I only got 2. George Bernard Shaw.
Yeah.
There's more to him than meets the eye, and I think that comes through in the book. Where did he get started? Where was the big bounce for him in terms of, you know, what was the first introduction to him to the wider world?
So he's a remarkable character, you know, because by 1930, say, if you went into any sort of half-educated company in Shanghai, in India, in Australia, anywhere in the world, right, and you just said 3 letters, GBS, that's all. Everybody knew who you were talking about, what he looked like, what his views were. He was astonishingly famous. And to answer your question, he did it all himself from nowhere, right? So this is a guy, when he was 19, he had worked his way up to be the head cashier in a state agency in Molesworth Street in Dublin.
And this is a fellow who left school at 15.
Left school at 15, never got to university, which was unusual for because he was from a kind of Protestant background, you know, relatively, well, they had been fairly well off, but his family had, he invented the word downstart. They were downstarts, you know. And I'm trying to argue in the book that this is a man who sort of did something that hadn't been done before, which is, as a private individual, he invented a personal brand that became a global sensation, you know. And he did it really all himself. So he was a shy, awkward Irish fella, went to London when he was 20, was still living at home with his mammy when he was 30. Had 5 rejected novels. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of people watching saying, that's exactly like my son, you know, who's still living at home and he's writing these novels that nobody wants to publish. And then he invented this character, basically, called GBS, who was brilliant, dazzling, know-all, could say anything, could say all the most shocking things. He could say, like, this is Victorian England, you know, that for women, marriage was just like kind of trade unionized prostitution. Because if you didn't have your own money, if you were dependent, then, you know, it wasn't a real relationship. That parents don't own their children, you know, which was a whole new thing. Like Jack the Ripper, for example, was the big story going on right in the 1880s. And Shaw writes letters to the paper saying, I wish to congratulate this person, Jack the Ripper, on drawing attention to social conditions in the East End of London. You know, satiric, provocative, but he's kind of, and he's driven really by, you know, wanting to overturn all the orthodoxies, everything that people think is a natural way to think about the world. He's saying, no, it's about power, it's about money. Whose interest is this in?
He was a prolific conversation starter because of the stuff that he wrote and the views that he took.
Absolutely. You know, so what he was able to do was he created this character as this kind of GBS character, right? And he got away with opening up all of these things. And then people started to say, well, actually, you know what, maybe he's right. You know, maybe some of the things he's saying, once you start bursting these bubbles, maybe you realize they were only bubbles, you know, the idea that women are inferior to men, you know, is that natural? No, it's just, it's invented, you know. The play that people probably know most, and I know the Rathmines and Rathgar musical side are doing My Fair Lady, which is a version of Shaw's play, Pygmalion. And it's very, very funny, very entertaining, very witty. It's great fun. But actually the point at the heart of it is, you can take a flower girl off the streets of London and you can pass her off as a duchess. Now, what does that say? It says that actually being a duchess is a cod. It's all a cod. It's like me on the restaurants, you know, getting 5 stars. You know, it's a performance, you know. And this is what he does, you know. And it's actually a very modern point. You know, people think of him, you know, it's kind of ancient stuff. But what he's saying is, you know, power and class and privilege are all about performance.
Which is still relevant.
It's more relevant than ever.
Is it more relevant than ever, you'd have to ask?
You know, he's the guy who's really the first person to be kind of saying this stuff. And then also using his own fame. So he's getting more and more famous, you know, himself. And he's using his own fame to say, look at what I'm doing. So he's not just that he's very famous, he's always telling you, I'm fooling you here. I'm manipulating you. I'm making you think these things.
I'm proving my own point.
Look at what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And he's an incredibly interesting character. And he passes himself off as kind of natural genius. I just do this because I just have these God-given gifts. But of course, that doesn't work. He worked incredibly hard. He wrote 60 plays.
I was thinking that because we mentioned the words prolific here. 60 plays.
Unbelievable. Yeah. I think most viewers, if we're honest, will think Pygmalion, the adaptation into My Fair Lady, the creation of that character. What was her name? Henry Higgins and Eliza Doolittle.
Eliza, her father.
And I think most people will be familiar with that. But when you look at the breadth of work, it's ridiculously impressive, isn't it?
And then you have to remember, that not only was he doing this, but he was constantly writing political articles, essays, letters to the newspapers. He's brilliant on. You look at him at any given time. Just to give you one little example, Easter 1916 in Dublin, the Rising, right, and the British start executing the leaders. Who's the first person to say, if you execute these people, they're going to become martyrs, and Ireland's going to be free? This is a really stupid thing to be doing. Shaw is writing the letters while the executions are still going on. He's saying, you don't realise what you're doing here. He's very, very smart about all of that kind of stuff.
And writing them all in his own brand, the GBS.
Yeah. So, I can say this kind of stuff. And actually, I think to the end of his life, he's actually quite a shy man. He's not this character, but somehow he manages to do this kind of thing. And
is that what you admire most about him? Was the fact that he was not on, to say he had his finger on the pulse is ridiculous, but... Or is it the breadth of work? What do you admire?
I think, if you're in the business of writing, you have to just admire his ability to write very complex things in a way that didn't make ordinary people feel stupid. My dad was a big Shaw fan. It still is. And I remember those paperback books in the house. The cheap Penguin books.
Yeah.
And there were very complicated ideas in them. He'd write these long prefaces to his plays. You have to read them, but people could read them. He was such a brilliant writer. It was funny. It was witty. It was kind of getting to you. And actually, what I really admire most is not really what he was telling people to think, but how he was telling them to think. He was saying, you have a right, no matter who you are. Like my dad was a bus conductor. You have the same right as everybody else to question.
Do you see yourself in him sometimes, Fintan?
I wish. I mean,
you wrote a brave piece about the News Talk episode and how you wouldn't be engaging with them anymore as a business. Is there a little piece of GBS going on in there?
Well, I suppose I must have absorbed some of this stuff as a kid, I suppose, in the sense of, you have a duty. If you're in the privileged position that I'm in, where you have a platform and people will read you, you have a duty to try to, as honestly as you possibly can, say what you think. You might be right, you might be wrong, but you try to be as honest and truthful as you possibly can. And if somebody doesn't like it, they don't like it.
Sure.
And you can't go around trying to second guess whether people are going to think you're a great guy or not.
It's a fascinating read about a very fascinating man. Great book.
Thank you very much. And it's a beautiful book, isn't it?
Absolutely beautiful.
And I can say this because I didn't do the design, but the design of the book is absolutely stunning. By the way, the cover image, that image you're seeing, is a cigarette card, which just shows how famous he was. That series of cigarette cards, there was Charlie Chaplin, Sherlock Holmes,
and
GBS. Actual cigarette cards.
Actual cigarette cards,
I hadn't realised that.
And that was how famous he was. People would recognise his image immediately.
Brilliant.
Thank you for coming in.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.